I am so excited to get into this today. You are just the perfect person to come on and talk about this. This conversation around mental health tech companies, I think, is more pressing than ever. We have seen some really, really upsetting things coming out of these platforms recently. So I'm so happy that you are on to talk about this. But please introduce yourself for listeners.
Yes, so my name is Candice Thompson. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and my office is located in Menlo Park, which is in the heart of Silicon Valley. Menlo Park is where Meta's office is, close to Google and Apple. And because of that, I have friends who not only work for places like OpenAI and are venture capitalists. So I'm living in the waters of a lot of these conversations where mental health is now butting up against technology in a way that it wasn't when I started my practice 15 years ago.
What's interesting is the mental health world was very antiquated, really. Like, for the longest time, it's like therapists refused to just engage online, and they're just like, no, thank you. And now it's almost been therapists are kind of forced to. So in terms of what we're talking about today, just before we started recording, you don't want therapists to feel like they need these companies to get started and do their work and be in business for themselves.
That's right.
Hey there, I'm Kristie Plantiga, and I'm the founder of Place Digital, a boutique marketing agency for therapists. This is Practice Marketing Insider. Each week, I examine one piece of outdated or overblown marketing advice for therapists and explain why it's inaccurate and what you should be doing instead.
So the marketing messages right now are, you need this. You need an EHR platform to have a private practice, AI tools. And that messaging can be so strong that I imagine if I was just coming up in the field, I don't know any better. I see ads for Simple Practice or, for a big health company. And that seems like the clear path. But the benefit that I had coming up in the age where none of this existed is that you can start your private practice without any of that. And I still use very few tools, even though I do telehealth therapy and in person now. But I think you can lower your costs and continue to have your practice independent from what these companies want from you and the risks that they introduce into your practice.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard that take on EHRs. I think like most therapists, it's like, what, have an EHR? What's the alternative to that?
Yeah. So, let me go back in time a bit. I became a therapist 15 or so years ago, and none of this existed. No one was doing, what was it, like Skype back then?
Oh
No
my
one
God,
was
yeah.
doing therapy online. That wasn't a thing. So everything was in person. All of, the notes were on paper. Maybe some people would type them out and print them. But, your files went into a locked cabinet behind two closed doors, and payment was in cash or check. It was old school. And even the therapist who owned the office that I rented from, he didn't have email. He wrote everything and put it in boxes,
Amazing.
like our physical boxes. And so coming up in that time, it's a different perspective because then you see these things coming in and oh, well, I still take notes on pen and paper, and that's really efficient for me. And I still have my locked file cabinet. And I don't ever want to come on and sound like a Luddite. Like, technology should be used as a tool, the same way it's used as a tool right now when we're in two different places and we have fancy microphones and all of that can be helpful, but the messaging shouldn't be upside down where we work within these systems only. Therapists should be able to choose and feel really empowered to choose what works for them and how much money they want to put into these things and the liability. I've seen online ads for potential class action lawsuits against some of these big EHRs because of the data breaches. And so it's something you have to keep in mind as therapists. If you're putting that private information and client data onto a company's server, where is that kept? How is it confidential? What happens if you leave that company and you get subpoenaed in 10 years? Do you have to download all of those things? There's all these other implications that I don't think are talked about, or, those companies are tech companies. They don't front load the risks the way a therapist would. And it's really important that we are leading with front loading ethics and the laws around our decision making.
Yeah, they're not held to the same standards whatsoever. And I watched your TED Talk actually this morning in
Oh,
preparation to
yeah.
speaking with you. And that was one of the things that you touched on is like this all developed so quickly
Yeah.
that the core principles that have been in the therapy world for decades and decades, it evolved too fast. I mean, I know a very famous lawsuit of a company I'm definitely not going to name here because I don't want to get a cease and desist, but they were part of a class action lawsuit because they were using protected health information to do advertising.
Yeah. Oh,
Right?
wow.
Because they're not held to the same standard as therapists, despite being the companies floating all of this stuff. It's awful.
I think that the tech world is becoming more common knowledge these days. But for those of listeners that aren't familiar with the Silicon Valley, a lot of tech companies are built on this idea that we calculate that lawsuits will happen, but we're going to move really fast to earn money. And by the time that our valuations are, in the billions, those lawsuits won't be a big deal and we'll be able to afford them. And it's part of the cost of their business. It's the whole move fast and break things. They're not slowing down to make sure this is ethical. Right now, we're seeing it everywhere. Record your sessions, use these AI scribes. Headway is now asking that we scan our faces before entering sessions for
I
therapists
saw
and
that and I was
clients.
like, at least try to help yourself. Like,
Right, yes.
at least try to like, like, don't shoot yourself in the foot with this stuff. Come on.
Yeah, but if you think about it from the tech perspective, how are companies valuated? Okay, you are worth more as a company by having all these bells and whistles, these tools, and using AI. Those terms get you more money from venture capital. And when you go public, your company is valued at a higher rate. And so you IPO and get a lot of money in. Okay, that's the way that these companies are thinking. They're rarely therapists. And sure, they'll have consultants on their teams and therapists, somewhere in the chain, but they're not at the top making the decisions. And so you have to get in the heads of these CEOs when you're choosing to partner with them, because absolutely they're not thinking about the data risks. They're not thinking about your license. They're not thinking about the implications. They're not thinking about the BBS or the board that you're a part of. They're thinking about how much money they can make, and they'll take into account all of the, legal ramifications as it serves them.
Yeah, and I imagine therapists on staff at these companies, that must be really tough because they must know that they have to walk a certain line, because it's really easy to just kind of find some reason to fire someone. It's like, oh, you don't actually fit in at the culture here of the company when, subtext, you've been kind of running your mouth a little bit too much and that's getting in the way of our goals here, right? I imagine as a therapist who is more of a clinical advisor at these companies, that must be a really, really difficult position to have.
Right. And these companies are going to pick people that validate their mission. So it always makes me think of Theranos, the Elizabeth Holmes,
Yeah,
blood
yeah, big in
company.
Silicon Valley, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she's such a it should be a good example for what happens when, tech
Um,
doesn't let healthcare lead. And she's in prison now, for breaking all these laws. Should be a huge warning sign. But if you watch any of those documentaries, when people who are in that world are raising concerns, they do just get fired. And so I think that you're right. There's only so much that therapists can do. Now, I do think there are solutions. There are more of us, and they need therapists right now. We're the product. And so that's how they get paid, is having these sessions. So by not participating or not going to certain companies, we do drive the market more than I think we realize.
yeah, I think the collective power of therapists, I imagine it's just so difficult to organize, some kind of collective against this stuff. And I've seen different things online and oh my gosh, am I rooting for these people to band therapists together. But I love the idea of going analog. in your practice? It kind of sounds like that's what you're referring to. It's like, yeah, let's just kind of like roll it back a little bit. I saw this productivity tool that this guy created. He's like, I've tried everything. No, no, no. And the product is just like a beautiful little like mahogany box or something. And all it has is essentially like a little flashcard that's a to-do list. And it's like 5 things. It's being sold for like $80 or
Oh
something.
my
Like
goodness.
it's insane. I'm like, I could give you like a sticky note, like pad, and that's that. But I think it's this idea of going analog and some of the benefits of that. I think the legal side is obviously, like, to your point, a big part, but what are some of the other benefits of just choosing to maybe for now, maybe forever, just not getting involved with these companies?
Yeah, therapy is simple. I mean, not the art of it. The art of it is very complex. But the construct, what we typically need is a couch, a chair, a box of tissue, a sound machine. And that's how it used to be. I think that we can replicate some of that online as well if needed. But absolutely, we don't need all these bells and whistles. And what people are looking for is someone that can provide them relief. And that's where therapists can be more empowered is sometimes cost is not the most important things. Now, of course, insurance, should be reimbursing and there's a whole other conversation to have here. Well, you have to remember when someone's desperate, when someone's on the verge of losing their children or going through a divorce, or they see their teenager trying to commit suicide, they will pay whatever they need to pay to get the help that they need. And that's where therapists, like any profession, like an oncologist, is not going to sit there feeling bad about what they charge. Again, insurance should be involved. And, I think there's a whole other systems conversation. But from that empowerment piece, knowing that we can provide that space and give the expertise, technology is not needed at all in that. Maybe my clock I need to have on the wall and that needs to work efficiently, but I don't need anything else but my mind and my attunement skills and my expertise and the relationship that you build with your client.
That's so powerful, and one of the things I always think about is it really does seem like the tech world discovered mental health in 2020. They're like, "Oh, shit," and just, like, some bro goes to therapy, and he's like, "Have I invented therapy?" Like, that's really what it feels like
Uh-huh.
to me a bit. But I love the idea of just returning to the core value of the service and thinking of the collective power of therapists because all of these companies are really just barnacles on therapists, where it's like
Exactly.
therapists are the ones, like, you
Yes.
cannot do this without it. Although I do have
Yes.
I've just sort of hear what you think about this theory. I have
Uh-huh.
this theory that a lot of these apps now, they're like therapy apps, but they're gonna burn out, like, all of the therapists that they could use, and it's gonna turn into, like, coaching. Or,
Interesting.
like, peer listening is kind of, like, what I suspect because I think that most therapists will be burnt out. And then I'm talking about, obviously, like, the therapy delivery platforms, not like EHRs and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I mean, coaching world is a whole other legal monster because they're not
Yeah.
supposed to be providing therapy. So, in my fantasy world, there's some great lawyers out there that should be listening and should be putting together class action lawsuits because all of that's illegal, right? Like you're taking advantage of therapists. I read something just the other day that there's a current lawsuit, and I don't know much about it, but as much as I read was very interesting to me that these big EHR companies are misclassifying therapists and that right now we're contracted, but because of all the things they make us do, we should be employees because we're
Yeah,
not
they're
actually
not that's
working
not
independently.
1099.
Exactly.
Oh,
And
okay.
so if we were employees, then we could unionize and have other rights. So I think that once lawsuits actually catch up to all the corruption happening in the world, then the hope these companies are worth less and that therapists will get some of their power back on independent platforms.
I would love to see it. I really, really would.
But
I'm on
this
the
is
edge
all
of my
brand
seat.
new, right? This
Yeah.
is brand new. And just like you said, in 2020, and for the therapists that have been here for the whole thing and had practices before and after, you're right. No tech bro discovered therapy. Someone had this great idea that, oh, we can make money from this. And BetterHelp started it. And then it just like things really caught fire and all of these other companies popped up. But yes, they are using our work. I just saw something on Instagram the other day, and I won't name the company, but
We're
talk
like
about it.
this whole time we're like, we're not gonna name them. Don't sue us.
Right. Yes. I mean, I don't want to get sued, but this stuff is public. So follow these different companies online,
Right.
and they're saying the quiet parts out loud. So this company says, like, let me look back, whatever, the 10 years since we started our company. And here are all our outcomes and whatever. But they didn't talk once in their carousel about therapists. It started with, we're an AI company. And look at all our outcomes. Now, keep in mind, this company just rolled out their AI bot a month ago. So who actually produced those outcomes? Therapists. We did. We're the ones. It wasn't that company at all. That company provided a platform, and yeah, they figured out some fancy ways to get employers to pay and get those people into a therapist's virtual or real office. But it's the therapists are the ones doing the work. That's where the value's at. And so then to say, oh, this was us and our technology all along, we should be listening to that, because that's how much they value us and that's how expendable they see us. And you do see it time and time again. Lyra did it at the beginning. They were such a great company, good for therapists. And I've never been a part of them, but they had a good reputation. They paid therapists very well. And then they start to take less independent therapists and they have people be full-time. So there's less flexibility. It's no longer this independent private practice. And then they drive prices down. And so I remember hearing last year that Lyra tried to lower rates for therapists, and therapists that refused were basically punished by no longer being posted their profiles on the Lyra platform.
That has to be illegal.
Of course, this should all be illegal. I agree. It's not my job on that part, but I would love for someone whose job it is to listen and to make a ton of money by advocating for us on that front.
You don't hear about pay cuts. Like in this economy, who gets a pay cut? That's what I've been just really struggling wrapping my mind around, is just getting a pay cut in this notoriously difficult economy for everyday people. And you just don't hear about it. Like, wages stay very low, of course.
Sure.
That's a huge problem. But to get a pay cut as a highly educated, credentialed professional, it's so unique to therapists. If you can't tell, I am super, super passionate about accurate, high-quality marketing education for therapists in private practice. I am now offering a free 15-minute call for therapists scaling group practices who want my honest opinion on their current marketing situation. I've worked with dozens of group practices, hundreds of solo practitioners, spoken to thousands. I've truly seen it all at this point. So if you'd like to pick my brain for a little while, you can head to practicemarketinginsider.com to book that free 15-minute call if you're a group practice owner scaling your practice. And now, back to the show.
Yes. One of my first posts that ever went viral on LinkedIn was saying, do you realize that the time that it takes to become a licensed therapist matches or is greater than the time that it takes to become a dentist? No one would expect your dentist not to be able to afford a home or to be price gouged or for their practices to all be bought up and, turned into some tech company. But somehow therapists have become very vulnerable to this.
Oh gosh, I could take this in a million directions, but something I am very, very curious to hear from you as someone who was in private practice before 2020, obviously still after. And this is something I've been thinking about quite a bit, and I'm very, very curious to hear your thoughts. How do you think all of this has affected the prospects of actually being in private practice?
The prospects, like how valuable it could still be for people to enter?
Yeah, I think is like a viable
career path.
Yeah. This is the direction I'm taking my mental health career.
I will say that I have not decreased clients through the process at all. I have been scared. There's definitely times that, a few clients graduate at the same time, and I think, is this it? Is this the time that these platforms, demolish my job? But something that I've seen consistently and with a therapist around me in private practice is people, when they are really in need of help, they want the name of someone who's trusted. They don't want a company. It's like if you broke your hip and you wanted to see a specialist, you're not going to be persuaded by someone saying, "Have you heard of Sutter Health?" You know,
Yeah.
like you want to hear the name of a doctor and someone that someone has been through and who did a phenomenal job and who you trust to go through surgery and be well informed. And so I think the same is still true for our industry, that people want a name, they want a trusted, vetted source, and we still have that.
Yeah, maybe one of the messages, and I haven't seen this explicitly, but maybe I've kind of absorbed it as a marketer in this space, is there is this kind of sense that referrals are dead, networking is dead. And maybe that's because therapists have never been more kind of separated in this journey. This is just, my sense is more of an outsider looking in on this perspective. Have you seen that at all? Where it's almost kind of like, oh, who does networking anymore? Referrals? No, I have to be on Psychology Today. And obviously, like, yeah, being on Psychology Today for a lot of people is worth it. But do you know what I mean?
I'm curious where those messages are coming from. I mean, perhaps a disgruntled therapist that is having a hard time. Often, especially places on LinkedIn or Instagram, when I hear messaging like that doesn't match what's best for therapists, I always go look for credentials. Who is this person? What do they do? A lot of times, it's someone who is not an actual therapist, someone who works for one of these companies, has something to benefit from that belief system. I don't think it's true. If someone asks me right now for a referral, I'm thinking of names. There are people I'm always going to be thinking of. And I get referrals from psychologists, I get referrals from psychiatrists, I get referrals from other therapists. I did one last year and I'll do one again this fall, but a cohort for therapists and help them along some of this process. Like, what are your areas of interest? What's your niche? I mean, you can have a few, especially if you're starting out. And then how do you target those spaces and communities so you're the person that comes to mind or one of the people? So I do some faith-based counseling. I've got great relationships with a lot of different churches. So I get churches that reach out to me. Again, I still think it's going to be a person. It's not dead. It's just, are we doing that work to keep those referrals and relationships alive? And I hope it's not a lost art to reach out to people and to have coffee and to build relationships.
I think it feels better than ever, to have those connections. But I do have one last question for you.
Yeah.
Does AI have any redeeming qualities in the world of psychotherapy?
Today, we need to be really serious about where the models are at. For coding, for hacking, we hear all of these stories and mythos and all, valuations and companies are about to go public. AI still makes a lot of mistakes. And I actually do talks around AI companions and the risks. And I just did one last week. And so, in the process of preparing for that, looking at the data that's available online, I think the resource I use is called like Analysis AI, which is great. They like break down all of the different platforms that are out there and the models and like how much they hallucinate and how factual they are and how good they are at like math and coding. Anyways, their data for how accurate the information is right now, and especially for complex questions, is about 50% and under. This is ridiculous. And we see it in headlines. Oh, this is just such a funky world to be living in right now.
Yeah.
These companies are being sued all the time for the bots assisting in suicide, the bots assisting in giving information for mass shootings. That's not okay. And right now, no guardrails to prevent those things from happening. And we have to keep in mind that the developers of these AI tools don't always have control of what the AI is going to do because it's a prediction-based model. There's no true intelligence there. AI is mimicking human behavior. So you have to keep in mind any like horror movie that's been out there or book that's been written, when we're seeing AI blackmail and do mischievous things, it's because they're mimicking humans. And this not an accurate sound tool at the moment, and they don't have consequences like humans do, right? If I'm helping someone do something insane and illegal, I know my license is on the line. I have conviction. There's a consequence that would happen to me if I did that. Where, again, if you look at the risk model that these companies take, they can pay for that lawsuit and keep going, and they're going to make tons of money in the process. So I do not advise it. There's tons of resources right now to learn about AI and where it's actually at and see beyond these marketing messages that if you don't learn it, you're going to be left behind. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. I heard a talk recently given by Jonathan Haidt, who was saying, like, you realize AI doesn't have a long runway. Like, that's the point of learning. It's the easiest thing to use. We don't need to learn to incorporate it to be up to date. That is a ridiculous thing to say. It's something you say if you want more people to use your tools and you want to make money and optimize, the user experience for your good. But therapists can be more discerning. We're a great bunch of critical thinkers. And so to use those skills and I think be very cautious.
I think that's one thing I've been thinking about too, is how much of the you're gonna fall behind type stuff. I've noticed that, like, even like my mom has been asking me, like, how should I use ChatGPT? And I'm like, you don't have to, mom. Like, I know, because she doesn't want to be left behind, but you just wonder, it's who's saying this? It must be the AI companies because they're trying to build up the hype,
That's
It's
right.
like,
But if you look at the real lived experiences, AI right now are making things worse. Now, maybe that might not be true in 6 months, a year, couple years time. But look at Google. Google is getting slammed right now because their search engine sucks because they're no longer indexing in the internet. And AI, I mean, I'll ask something and it'll give me like the first things from 2020. I'm like, that's not a relevant resource for my question. I heard like Starbucks using it for orders and then all these things going wrong and they're rolling it back. It's so sloppy. We're using a very baby tool that's not well understood and saying that it's at this factual rate to mimic humans in a rate that it's actually not. And it's being inflated for these IPOs that are coming up. So, yes, it's very silly. The marketing messages are very strong and we can get ahead of it by just looking up, like, fact check. Is this stuff true? If it's not true, what are the risks of using them? And be really cautious when you use them.
yeah. And you don't need them.
No, you don't need that. I mean, you can handwrite a note in minutes. And here's the reality I want to add. If the hallucinations, sorry, I'm like on fire. This is
No, I
totally
love it.
my
Keep
jam
going.
right now. If hallucinations are at the high rates that they are, then it actually adds more work. So I had a story I heard recently of someone who went to a doctor for like a foot problem. And the doctor used like an AI scribe, whatever. And afterwards, they got diagnosed for a broken leg and were
Oh my
prescribed
God.
things that were totally unnecessary. Now, that means the doctor did not review their notes, which
Yep.
is like another lawsuit waiting to happen. But that's not helpful. So if we're using these AI scribes and then you're having to check for its hallucinations and rewrite it, wouldn't it be more efficient to just write the note in the first place and be using our cognitive skills, honing in those clinical skills so that we have them for years to come? One more quick thing, if that's okay.
Yes. Oh my
A
gosh. Of
recent
course.
research was just put out. It was collectively done by researchers from MIT. There was Oxford, Carnegie, Malone, and UCLA. And they did a study that after 10 minutes a day use of AI, that the participants were seen to have lower resiliency and completed tasks more poorly than those not using AI at all. That's only 10 minutes a day.
I believe that because I've experienced that in myself. I'm like, wow, are you always this lazy? Or do you just want AI to do this for you? I can totally see that. I don't know. And maybe the question I know that I'm left with, and maybe for listeners to think about, I think the main messaging around AI is it saves you time, it saves you effort. And maybe the question is, what do you actually save? If you really think about it, like, what are you actually saving by using these tools? And maybe you're losing way more, at least in the short
Like
term.
the planet.
Yeah. I'm like, again, this could be, no one's asked me to do a TED Talk, wonder why, but this is like, maybe that, like, and no expert, right? Like, at all, but also no one is an expert in AI. I don't think, because maybe people work at these AI companies, sure. But like, other than that, no one is really an AI expert. But yeah, what do you actually save is something that I'm going to be thinking about.
Yeah. There's a lot to lose. And it's important to be mindful humans that want holistic outcomes for our clients, for ourselves, for our own minds, and for our planet and our community.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your wisdom. And what's interesting is we could record in a year from now, and who knows what that conversation will be like.
Absolutely. Happy to come back a year from now and talk about all those lawsuits that happened. And
please, lots of lawsuits happen. But seriously, thank you so much, Candice. Really excited for this episode to come out. It's never been more timely. So
yeah, thank you.
And that's it for this week's episode. If you want to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn or Instagram at Kristie_PlaceDigital. If you're interested in working with me and my team, you can head over to placedigital.com. I'm Kristie Plantinga. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.